All right, hopefully this video doesn't mess up today like it has like the last two times we've done this. But we're going to be talking about a very important time period known as the Progressive Era. And this is going to be the last couple sections here. And in this one, we're going to talk about the progressives in the White House, and then we're going to talk about how that progressivism kind of spread out through America and tries to address the problems in America. Now, America, without a doubt, is an awesome place to live. We have a Constitution, which is one of the greatest achievements in human history. We should all love being American. I think it's important that you love your country to some extent. You don't always have to agree that your country is the best country ever, that we've done everything right, but we certainly are one of the countries that tries to give freedom to its people, and I think it's really important. And that has not always been the case. That is something that we have always strived to get better on. And going from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, America is a really rapidly changing place. And it didn't change without having some problems and having to address some of those problems. And they're going to both be, addressed at a fundamental human level as well as at a federal level. So you're going to have to change the way people treat each other and how they think about each other. But also in a federal sense, you're going to have to change legislation. And there's going to be a large group of people that are pushing for these improvements in society. And again, whether or not they achieve all of them are going to be, it's not going to be necessarily the great measuring stick of whether or not they are achieved, but more that we've addressed that, hey, there's problems, we need to fix them, we need to work towards that. Part of the problem is America in the 1900s looks nothing like the America that we are eventually going to get to in the 1950s or 60s. And then the 1900s don't look anything like they did in the 1850s and 1860s. And so you have this really, large roller coaster of ups and downs that America is kind of going through for this 100-year stretch where, the Civil War, we're fighting to end slavery. That's good. Then you have the Jim Crow era, and that kind of declines. Then, industrialization, you have ups and downs there. And so the progressives are really going to start to try and capture governmental support and popular support in a way that other groups had not ever really been able to do. And there's going to be some major players within this progressive group, and it's really difficult to define who the progressives were. And I think that, in my honest opinion, I think that history has done a poor job explaining the progressives. And I'm not going to say that this is the greatest way, because I could take 15 weeks and just talk about all the different aspects of progressivism, right? You could do a 15-week class just on the progressive era and all the different groups and motivations that they have. But we're trying to give just a brief overview so that you get a general idea of what's happening here. I don't know why it's doing that. Don't mess up, please. The biggest factor in the development of the progressive ideas is clearly urbanization, which should be a familiar term by now, which is just the idea that America is moving into the city. And progressives are typically, going to be in urban areas. They're going to be in the Northeast. Most progressives are going to be educated. They're going to be middle class. They are also going to be, Protestant, reform-minded men and women. The middle class really has a lot to do with this, and the growth of education and the idea that, we moved up from being at the bottom to being in the middle, and other people should have the same opportunities. So this is really going to make this movement kind of, these people are going to be found in all the different aspects of the movement. Now, like I said, not all aspects of the movement are working together, which I think is the problem with calling it the progressive movement. When I say the progressive movement, it makes you kind of think like, oh, they're all going in the same direction. That's not exactly true. Okay, in the same way that if you go to the club, or y'all don't go to the club, but you don't go to the club. Or if you go to like a house party, I guess, and the music's going, You'd be like, hey, let's go do some dancing, right? And there's people dancing, maybe. I don't know. And everybody's dancing to the same song, kind of, but nobody is pretty much doing the same dance, unless you go to like a country club and they're all like line dancing. But even then, there's some people got some extra spicy moves. That was my spicy moves there, I can't do that too often. I don't want to get nobody in trouble. It gets a little too spicy. I finally got it cool in this room. I don't want to heat it up too much. Yeah, that happened. So, all three progressive presidents. Eventually Roosevelt, the one that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit of these lectures, that's going to be kind of the last of the big progressive presidents, progressive era. But you also have William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson, and who we're going to talk about a lot because of his role into getting into World War I. So Roosevelt, Taft, they are Republicans, whereas Wilson is a Democrat. So again, the progressives, today we think of progressives as like the far left group, right? When you hear the term progressive left, you're thinking like transgenderism and like, postmodernist views of race and critical race theory. Like that's the progressives' ideology today. But at the time of the progressive movement, quote unquote, I mean, you had Republicans, Democrats, all these people were trying to progress society in different ways and with different goals. So it's not a political party. You can't say, oh, the progressives, that was the Democrats. Oh, the progressives, that was the Republicans. But I think another one of the things that really brings these people together is going to be, the belief in like laissez-faire economics, the idea that the government should kind of stay out of economic ideas, social Darwinism and the Gilded Age, stuff that's coming out of there, that some of these ideas are wrong. Laissez-faire, that's wrong. If the government stays out of it, you're going to end up with corruption in business and people are going to take advantage of each other. Social Darwinism, the idea that just some people are inherently better than others, that's wrong. And so just understand that these are, the laissez-faire economics and the social Darwinism, they are what kind of undergird this racism and classism that we saw take place in the Gilded Age politics, where everything is, morally or intellectually wrong, and that, the people in the government should, be separate, and all this. Well, that caused a lot of problems. That didn't really make everybody better. That made a few people better. But for the most part, the vast majority of people end up way worse off. And so now they believe that now the government and people should work together to correct these abuses. And really every aspect of society is going to end up being touched to some extent by this progressive ideology. And so, you have this concern about the effects of industrialization. You're going to have optimistic views on human nature and the potential for progress, commitment to improve all aspects of American life. All of these things are going to be found within this spirit of progressivism, okay? And so there's going to be a huge push forward by all of society. A lot of reformers are going to abandon their individual reforms to address much larger structural problems. So, they go, hey, there's a lot of people that were like, oh, we shouldn't have 6-year-olds working in factories. It's dangerous for 6-year-olds to work in factories. And people are like, yeah, that's a nice individual goal that you're worried about the children. But don't you think that it would be better off if we just got, overall workers' rights fixed? Don't you think that if we work on the larger structural problem, that it'll take care of the individual problems themselves? Right? And so some of these social, reforms are going to have to give way to much larger goals. They're also going to try and apply scientific method and scientific thinking to social reform. It's at this point that like being a social worker becomes a job. Like you go to school and you learn all the ways that if you work in the government, you can help people. And so this is going to be like, you're going to apply scientific principles to this. Sociology comes out of this progressive era. A lot of the ideas and people that are pioneers of sociology are coming out of this progressive era because they're looking at society and they're saying, surely there's a way to study how to make this better using a scientific framework. And that's really how sociology comes to be. And so there's a couple groups that I think are worth really spending a little bit of time on, and a couple specific laws that we're going to really kind of understand as well. And so we're going to give some good examples of, some of those things as we go through this. But let's talk about muckrakers. Now, muckrakers basically really embody, the idea that the pen is mightier than the sword. And it kind of is a cliche for journalism, but at the turn of the century, thanks to really the print revolution and the technology to be able to spread ideas and, communication technology, you can get ideas all over the country, that journalism is going to find a new powerful voice. And essentially what was printed was now more powerful than ever. And not only could you print things, but you could show pictures, and kind of you end up with the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words, because if I can show you a picture of some of these things, the human condition, you can't just ignore it. You can just be like, oh, I'm going to skim over this article and not really let it affect me. If I see a picture of a child missing an arm because they lost it in a machine, it's pretty hard to get that out of your brain. You get what I'm saying? So unless you're in the same physical space as some of these terrible things happening, you don't really have a true idea of it. But once you have this revolution in photography and its ability to inform the masses about what's happening, you're not going to have the same reaction. And muckrakers are really going to bring this to light. And you have Teddy Roosevelt. He's describing these people who dig around in the muck, and they're going to be telling people about American life and the injustices that are happening and the wrongdoings that are happening. And remember, there's plenty of that to go around during the Gilded Age. So one of the most interesting was a guy named Lewis Hine, and he documented the hardships of child laborers through photography. Really interesting. He focuses on child labor, showing them as very, dispirited. He showed that approximately 3 million children under the age of 9 worked full-time jobs in the United States in the early 1900s. That's crazy. Imagine being 9 years old and your mom waking you up and being like, hey, time for work, buddy. Grab your boots. Don't forget to eat your Eggo, right? Get your hat. See you later. 12 hours later, after working in the coal mines, you come back home to like collard greens for dinner. Because you don't, and they're like, hey, did you get paid today? And you're like, yep, got a week's wages, 6 12-hour days. I'm like, great, how much did you make? $1.65. Right? Yeah, so I mean, it's awful. Another crazy example was this guy, Upton Sinclair, and this one's pretty gross. Oh, yeah, I forgot about it. Oh, huh? Yeah, I'm going to read you. No, that's a like a leg quarter. It's not. I mean, I don't know what it is, honestly. It's gross. Yeah, it was pretty gross. Where is? I'm trying to find it. I'm going to pause this just for a second. So he decides that he's going to report on the terrible things happening in the meat processing facilities of America. This is the stuff that is going out to people's dinner tables. And he's going to go interview people and talk about how disgusting and terrible the conditions are. So I really want you to listen. This is what was going on in the meatpacking industry at the time, that he goes and interviews people and writes about this back in the early 1900s. It says, with one member trimming beef in cannery and another working in a sausage factory, the family had firsthand knowledge of the great majority of packing town swindles. For it was the custom, as they found, whenever meat was so spoiled that it could not be used for anything else, either to can it or else chop it up into sausage. With what had been told them by Jonas, who had worked in the pickle rooms, they could now study the whole spoiled meat industry on the inside and read a new and grim meaning into that old packing town jest that they use everything of the peel except the squeal. Jonas had told them how the meat had been taken out of the pickle would often be found sour, and how they would rub it with baking soda to take away the smell and sell it to be eaten on free lunch counters. Also, of all the miracles of chemistry which they performed, giving to any sort of meat, fresh or salted, whole or chopped, any color, any flavor, and any odor they chose. In the pickling of hams, they had an ingenious apparatus by which they saved time and increased the capacity of the plant. A machine consisting of a hollow needle attached to a pump. By plunging this needle into the meat and working it with a foot, a man could fill a ham with pickle in a few seconds. And yet, in spite of this, there would be hams found spoiled, some of them with an odor so bad that the man could hardly bear to be in the room with them. To pump these into the packers and had a second, much stronger pickle which destroyed the odor, a process known to the workers as giving them 30%. Also, after the hams had been smoked, there would be some found that had gone to the bad. Formerly, these had been sold as number 3 grade, but later on, some ingenious person had hit upon a new device, and they would extract the bone about which the bad part generally lay and insert into the hole a white-hot iron. After this invention, there was no number 1, 2, or 3 grade. There was only number 1 grade. Packers were also originating such schemes they had called boneless hams, which were all the odds and ends of pork stuffed into a casing, and California hams, which were the shoulders, the big knuckle joints, and nearly all the meat cut out, and fancy skinned hams, which were made of the oldest hogs, whose skins were so heavy and coarse that no one would buy them. That is, until they'd been cooked and chopped fine and labeled head cheese. It was only when the whole ham was spoiled that it came into the department of Elizabetta, cut up by 2,000 revolutions a minute flyers, and mixed with half a ton of other meat. No odor that ever was in a ham could make any difference. There was never the least attention paid to what cut up of sausage. There would come all the way back from Europe old sausage that had been rejected, that was moldy and white. It would be doused with borax and glycerin and dumped into the hoppers to be made over again for home consumption. Just put it in the breakfast sausage. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust where the workers had trampled and spit uncounted billions of tuberculosis germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip on it. Thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in the storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over the piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of dried rat dung. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then the rats, bread, and meat would all go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even if he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with the poisoned rat that was a joke. There was a tidbit, sorry. There was no place for men to wash their hands before they ate dinner, so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled into the sausage. There were butt ends of smoked meat and scraps of corned beef and all the odds and ends of waste of the plants that would be dumped into old barrels in the cellar and left there. Under the system of rigid economy where the Packers enforced, there were some jobs that it only paid to do once in a long time. And among these was cleaning out the waste barrels. Every spring they did it, and the barrels would be dirt and rust, old nails, stale water, and all the bits and pieces that hadn't been used. And cartload after cartload would be taken up, dumped into the hoppers with fresh meat, and sent out to the public's breakfast tables. Some of it they would make into smoked sausage, but if the smoking took time and therefore was expensive, they would call upon their chemistry department and preserve it with borax and color it with gelatin to make it brown. All of their sausage came out of the same bowl, but when they came to wrap it, they would stamp some of it special and then charge you 2 cents a pound more.
So they cook the rat meat with it together?
Yeah.
Oh, y'all.
Yeah. So this guy is literally going out and he just puts this book out there. And people are like I can imagine sitting there eating sausage for breakfast while you're reading this book and then being like, and literally vomiting. That's disgusting. Like I said, they'd go wash their hands in the barrels, and they've been dealing with blood and all this stuff. And then at the end of like the year, they'd just take all these empty barrels of water that had all this nasty stuff in it, and they'd be like, oh, just go put it in the hoppers with the meat. It'll be all right. Disgusting. Yeah. Muckrakers. Yeah. So, yeah. There were people that said that, and there's another one that would talk about, there was another excerpt that is not that one, but it's also quite lengthy, that would talk about the people that worked in these factories that, they used to do it all by hand. And that after about 3 years, your hands would be so scarred up that you couldn't even close them anymore and you had to retire and go do something else. Or if you worked in the department that dealt with like getting the meat off or getting the skin off, those chemicals to get the skin off the meat was so corrosive that like people after 5 or 6 years, literally it would disintegrate their fingers like to nubs because you're literally just putting your bare hands in acid, and all of that acid's going into the meat, and people's disintegrated fingers and skin are all going into the meat, and yeah, America. And they paid them nothing, and so Sinclair was actually kind of disappointed with the way people reacted to it. But what ends up happening is that Roosevelt reads his book and he's like, this can't be real. So Roosevelt, who was president, goes and sends a group of people to go and investigate. Go find out how much of this is true and how much of it did he make it up to just like sell books, like there's a lot of like skepticism, like there's no way that this is real. You know what I mean? Like if you read that today, you'd be like, there's no way this is real. There's no way, right? And then the president goes and sends them, and they're like, not only is it real, I think he held back. And so Roosevelt's like, oh, no. And so it's from this that you actually end up with Roosevelt instituting and looking for Congress to pass something called the Pure Food and Drug Act, which is actually going to make sure that factories have to ensure the quality of the meat. And so out of the after the Pure Food and Drug Act, you end up with an organization at the federal level called the FDA. Yeah. And the FDA comes up with a very sophisticated system of making sure that quality assurance is upheld. And now there's like 3 classifications of meat that you can buy, correct? Select, choice, prime. Now, believe it or not, there's actually there's like 9 levels, but you don't find them. Like, there's not a grocery store anywhere that's selling below select. Okay? Yeah, there's like 6 levels below that. But nobody in America's buying that. You know what I mean? We're like selling it to Mexico or something. It's a joke. But now everything has an FDA label on it. And now they have to tell you how much fat is in there, how much of what is in there. Like, you had to put what's in a hot dog, you know, like on the package. Hot dogs used to be terrible for you. I think they're delicious. You don't like hot dogs?
I do, I'm saying, I thought that they were so bad for me.
I mean, they're not like great, but I mean, they used to be putting like, they literally would just like fill them with like sawdust. Like they'd put all kinds of stuff in there to like with the meat to make it fill the casing more so they could sell more. And it was all like the nastiest meat you could get. Like the stuff that was too bad to be putting into people's dinner tables according to these standards, that's what went in hot dogs. So anyways, yeah, pretty messed up. Again, the Food Drug Administration. You also end up with some business reform and stuff like that. Safety reform. One of the biggest things that brought about safety reform, it was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. 146 people were killed in this fire. There was a big factory. They were making shirts, and like you walked in up here, and then you took a staircase down to like the factory floor. Well, the factory caught on fire, and then the staircase burned, and then they were all trapped and just died. Like it was like 146 people, and like 140 of them were like women and children. Yeah, they were like, maybe we should fix that. You know, like maybe we should do something to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Yeah, good idea. And so then they started coming up with like government regulating companies for like workplace safety, and that's where you kind of get like OSHA and FEMA and fire marshals, and all of that stuff is coming out of this to make sure that, you know, fire codes are safe. You also end up with a lot of child labor laws happening with like 30 different states banning child labor, or at least setting parameters on their ages. You know, if your parents own the shop, yeah, you can work like if you're like 12, 14 or whatever, right? Like if your parents own a company, you can go like work for them like pretty early. Does anybody know the age on that? How old do you have to be to like work for your parents? It's not 16. Work visa? That's like if you're coming from out of the country. I think it's like 12 or 13. Like if your parents owned a donut shop, I think like at 12 or 13, you can be like working the register. You know what I mean? But you can at 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you're certainly not going to be 5 years old working in a textile factory, right? Like, that's pretty crazy. Overall, the conditions do improve. Progressive efforts are successful, but they're not perfect, of course, but they are a step in the right direction. And then we'll have just kind of a quick story of, some of that there. And then we're going to talk about women's suffrage in the next section, the last section, and then we'll be done with this module.